Good morning. What's going on, guys? I hope you're all well. We are, I think, on the last day of our month-long journey testing out the new unit in R9. And we are now, we left Moab this morning, and we're heading through Utah, a remote part of Utah. And we'll be then coming into Arizona, making our way back. So I was thinking about another subject we could go over today, and that is, where can you expect or be prepared for coming across a police radar and or the nature of the radar that you could potentially encounter. And I'm thinking about that because we're on a remote section here of road, and it's pretty hot out here at the moment. We're coming into summertime, and that makes me think. And so when you're on a remote road, for example, in this case, your radar detector is very difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult types of driving scenarios that you could experience while you're driving with a radar detector. And the reason for that is a couple. First, if you rely on Waze in a more developed trafficked area, you're going to have more people, obviously potentially reporting stationary police running their traps, whatever they're doing. And when you're in a very remote area, you don't have that many users to be able to do that, number one. And number two, it's not uncommon to have no cell service, so no ability to communicate to the internet anyway and get real-time updates. So those two types of things. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is when you're on a remote stretch of road like here between towns, and in the case of here, Utah, speed limit's basically only 65. Well, very easy to do more quickly than 65. Very easy. In fact, I generally want to do that because you want to cover a lot of distance in a short amount of time. So the types of encounters, there are several that you're going to likely encounter which make it more difficult, or at least one of them is going to make it more difficult on the radar detector, and that is most of the police officers that are in these areas and patrolling these areas or have the responsibility of a particular area are moving. They're often smaller departments, police departments, and they don't want their officers necessarily in a stationary position. They want them rolling, and that gives them the opportunity to patrol their area, potentially come across disabled vehicles. And so, even if Waze were something that you could rely on, Waze, one of the weaknesses of Waze is, or Escort Live, any of those necessarily, is that you can't track moving radar. There's no way to mark it.
Wild horses.
Wild horses, yeah. So, they become invisible to Waze anyway. And, sometimes you're fortunate that if the police officer is lazy and he just sets the threshold on the speed, anything alerts above it, he can run it in a constant on fashion. And most of the time here, you'll get a sufficient warning. Not always. If they're coming around a bend or the weather's a little humidity cuts down on radar, a lot of foliage, not you're getting that out here, or mountains, things of that nature. That's all going to obscure radar. So, but generally, if you're running constant on, he's going to be coming the other way, and you should have sufficient time to slow down. So just be prepared for that. And I like to think when you're driving in an area where the radar detector, there's not enough cars necessarily to give you advanced warning to instant on cars ahead of you that could be targeted, either in a moving or stationary. I say you drive ahead of the radar detector, which means you got to anticipate the possibility of a police officer running radar. And up here, out in this area, in these remote northwestern Arizona, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, even New Mexico, Western Texas. A lot of times you're going to see these officers driving pickup trucks, real pickup trucks, and you wouldn't necessarily expect, if you're back east and you're seeing a lot of patrol vehicles, Ford Explorers, things of that nature, to see like a Ram or GMC, any of those types of pickup trucks actually running radar. But that's what it is. So you have to be prepared to identify a police in an unusual, unexpected vehicle you may not be used to. The other thing it's important to know, state troopers generally have a universal coloration marking on their vehicle. It's good to know what that is if you're in your area. So, get an idea of what a vehicle looks like from a distance based on your knowledge of how these vehicles look. A little bit more difficult with these small towns, local sheriffs, local police departments. They're going to have their vehicles, whatever their, paint scheme is to their area. You're not necessarily going to know that, particularly if you're like us, you're driving multi-state, you're coming through towns. So that's what you need to be prepared for. Sometimes if I'm really cruising and I see a vehicle coming the other direction, I back it off a little bit, or a collection of vehicles coming, I back it off a little bit and get prepared to hit that brake if you need to, in the event one of those is a patrol vehicle coming your way, running like instant on. Another area that you need to be concerned about in these remote areas, or even in other areas where you're running on secondary roads like Route 1 on the East Coast, where you're paralleling or major interstates, but you're on like a secondary state road, is the speed limits could be like 65 or 55 out in the open, and you're getting used to cruising at those speeds or better than those speeds, and then you come to a smaller town, and the speed limits precipitously drop, sometimes 10 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, sometimes ultimately 30 or 40 miles an hour, and they can do that a little bit at a time at 10-mile differences, once as you get closer to town, or it can be a big drop. And if you're not really paying attention and you're relying on your radar detector to alert you, well, you could stumble into a trap. And in fact, that happened to me, didn't it? When we were coming out of Alberta, we had been very good at not getting tickets on that last cross-country trip. But sure enough, coming into a small town, this is what you have to watch for. A police officer can sit in a gas station parking lot or some other kind of parking lot, blend in with the vehicles, and point in your direction, see you coming in, observe that you're not slowing down sufficiently or even just indiscriminately, and then they hit you with IO, and it's very easy then to get a big ticket because if you're thinking you're doing 5 over in 60 or 65, you're doing 70 or 60 and a 55, and the next thing you know you're down to 35. All of a sudden you're 20 over, 25 over. That's very easy to do. So that's an area where you can expect to also see and experience police. So you just get prepared for that when you're driving with the detector. Something else here, when you're out in the west, like we are now, getting in the summer, Arizona, Utah, the sun can get very hot out, in Texas, any of these states, Arizona, it can easily get over 100 degrees. And sometimes, if they are stationary, it can happen. What you'll tend to find in these areas, wherever there's shade, a lone tree or not many trees, and you could be prepared for running into a police officer that's sitting under shade, which keeps their car cooler, and that's something else to be concerned about or be aware of. So when you're out in these remote areas and you see some kind of foliage of some sort, a bunch of trees, be prepared but there could be a police officer there, and you may want to back off. Another situation where you could encounter radar unexpectedly is, and I'll just use the state of Pennsylvania. When you're on, like, say, if you're on the Pennsylvania Turnpike or on the highway, it's not uncommon. In fact, all Pennsylvania State Police run in a stationary position. There's no moving radar in PA. And so what do? They'll sit behind an overpass or to the side of it with their radar horn mounted on the side of their vehicle, pointing backwards. And they're very selective in the use of their radar. So unless you're having a lot of people traveling with Waze, and you can tell that, for example, if you're using Waze, be prepared that there could be an officer there running radar ready to nail you. And you can, generally, they operate radar closer distances. They have a lower power K-band Raptor type RP1 scenario. Lower power means closer range. More lethal in that respect if they're running instant on. So you can really watch, look ahead, and get a glimpse of the side of the vehicle in front of the overpass. When you're driving, let's say like on 995, you're going through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Oftentimes you have a large median separating both directions of travel. And like in Virginia, it's not uncommon. You'll see a lot of berms. And the police will often sit between two of those berms. And you'll sometimes see a turnaround, authorized vehicles only. You'll see that no U-turn type sign or some indication of that authorized vehicles turning only. And you can obviously stumble across one of these guys, and they're right there ready to pounce on you with radar. And where there are not berms, often there are lots of trees. You'll see that all the way down 95, all these different states, even Georgia, they'll be sitting again at one of those turnarounds, ready to pounce. Also, if you drive up to like Northway 87 above Albany, Glens Falls is notorious, that area, for the New York State Troopers sitting there between the medians, trees where there's a break to do a turnaround. And you got to be prepared for that, definitely. Also, you drive south, and it's not uncommon to see a trooper sitting on an on-ramp ready to pounce after an overpass, sitting high above, ready to target vehicles from the back. And that's really, you can beat it, you can beat that without a radar detector. But if you're not paying attention, or you're not aware of that type of targeting technique, you don't want to find out, trust me. So what I generally do, and it's become second nature, when you're driving and you go under an overpass where these long approaches on merging a lane, I turn my head and I go all the way around, because in that period of time before you can get in front of him, for him to operate his radar, he can't get you from the side. He's going to wait till you get ahead. You have all of that time to see him sitting there to brake, right? That's happened with us. So pay attention. You don't rely on your radar detector for that. It'll be too late. I've seen in New Jersey on 78 around Jutland. It's about mile marker 21 east of the Pennsylvania state line, the Delaware River. They'll run laser. Denver does that too on, I think it's Interstate 25, for example. That's just one of them. They'll do that at night too. They'll sit there with laser, same kind of scenario. They can target you from the back. It really isn't countermeasures are very difficult to defeat, right? Laser from the back, especially off axis, which generally is going to be the case when they're targeting from an on-ramp on an angle to the highway. Same with laser overhead on an overpass. And sometimes it's hard to see a vehicle, but if you're driving on an interstate or secondary road and you see a vehicle, the top of the roof of a vehicle just parked and not moving on an overpass, there's a possibility that they're running laser, for example, and they can target you from a great distance. This nonsense about 1,000 feet, 500 feet, yeah, that can happen generally in more crowded areas. When you're on these open interstates where it's level, it's not uncommon for us to get targeted over 2,000 feet. In fact, we did one where we were on Interstate 40. We had the TPX right in Vail together. And we got targeted from such a distance with a Dragon Eye, as a matter of fact. We couldn't even see them. So that's where you have to be prepared. Another one, often with laser, to maybe radar as well, but to laser, just because of the astounding targeting ranges that they can do with police laser, is when you're coming over a long crest and a long straightaway, right? So you're coming over and it's really long, and that's not uncommon here in the West. You come into Albuquerque, for example, right? You're coming in on Interstate 40. You're coming from the west. You're going east. Before you come into Albuquerque, you're at crest, and you come down and you're seeing the city lights below you, and it's a long, long way down. The same when you come into Kingman a little bit, right? Right. That'll happen. You got to watch those. You're very vulnerable for that. If not a lot of vehicles there, you could get targeted, and with laser, without any countermeasure, even Vail or a laser jammer, they could potentially get your speed, and you need a good radar detector with laser. But you got to be prepared. You got to think ahead in those scenarios. So I'm just trying to throw out all these areas where you need to be prepared. Think ahead of your radar detector, because ultimately the best radar detector is between your ears. Another, we just found this in Edmonton, and this is pretty specific to Edmonton in Alberta. It's a heavily photo-enforced area, and they run something called a Dragon Cam, and they also sit up on an overpass, but instead of targeting a vehicle approaching, they're targeting vehicles going away. So it's harder to spot them because they're going to be on the opposite side of the roadway, getting vehicles like yourself going away. So they're not on the leading side, the front side of that overpass, they're on the back side of that overpass. Because of that angle, it may be harder for you to see that the vehicle is there. And you can't necessarily rely on Waze to have it marked, because the officer's not even on the highway and people may not even catch it. And then as you see with the Dragon Eye video we did in interviewing with the police and seeing how they configure that, there's really no protection against that other than the foreknowledge that they're there. So that's another difficult scenario, very specific, I think, to Edmonton. But there are other areas where they can tag you with laser from the rear. But certainly in Edmonton with the Dragon Cam, they got the video end or the photo evidence that goes with that. So that's the laser. Think of another area too that you have to consider, which is when you're driving and you're coming over a crest and you can't see what's over that crest, like that. And the case we had in Ontario, we were coming outside of Thunder Bay, and there was a guy sitting on the shoulder, opposite side of the road, waiting for vehicles to crest, to turn on his radar. And can't always be assured to get an advance notice of that if there isn't a vehicle ahead of you that he's doing that. So when you're cresting a road, be prepared that a police officer could be sitting on the other side of that lower elevation targeting you and just hit you with instant on. So yeah, that's another example. And generally that's with radar, not so much laser, because he's going to need time to be able to target you, and it generally is closer. So radar is I think the gold standard for that type of targeting scenario. I think we're in Arizona. Yep, there was the sign Utah, and we're in Arizona now. So another area are construction zones. That's something you really have to look at. And the reality is you should be slowing down anyway. Certainly in an active construction zone. And I certainly give respect to the workers there, because they're put their lives on the line every day when they're working in these areas. I think distracted driving is probably a big risk factor. You don't obviously do that in a construction zone, but in terms of enforcement, many states, and rightly so, have speeding fines that are doubled in construction zones. So that's an area where you also need to be cognizant of where radar or laser could be used. And so, speed limits obviously typically drop. And sometimes before if you have a merging two lanes into one lane, before those lanes merge, your speed is being reduced by those signs anyway. So if it's 80, 65, 60, 55, 50, and those speeds are dropping prior to that one lane merge. And it's not uncommon when police are running that they're going to be in the construction zone, and a lot of times they'll be on the leading edge of the construction zone, whichever direction you're going, as the speed is dropping, right? So that's an area, again, where you want to be cognizant of a real potential to have an encounter. So don't rely on your radar detector necessarily just to give you the alert that there's going to be radar there. Oh yeah, they're nice. They're running. They're beautiful. They're what do you call those? Mustangs, kind of. So yep. So that's another one. That's the major areas, encounters that you may come across when you're driving in more of these remote areas with a radar detector, and how to be on guard and not solely rely on your radar detector, because again, no countermeasure is 100%. It's a tool. It can be a very good tool, and in our case, you see with our unit in R9, it's basically paid for itself already with all of the tickets that we've avoided as a result of being alerted to where radar was, even some very close calls. And you figure, even if it's a $3,900 plus product, it's an expensive product relative to like a dash mount. If you're avoiding, how many tickets do you think we could have avoided on this trip, Victoria? About 10,
at least
12, 15? I mean, really, at the speeds we drive or I drive, these tickets are going to get pricey. And not only the tickets, potentially demerit points hit your license, and then insurance, and those things can stick with you like a bad hangover for years. And so you can have multi-$1,000 outcomes. So in this case, it really paid for itself. So at any rate, I guess that's about it. We'll see you soon. Give us visit RadarBusters when you have an opportunity. We have a lot of detectors out there, a lot more information. You visit us on Facebook. Look for RadarBusters. You'll see the little rabbit. Follow that, and you'll be able to get our updates there, and our newsletter on the website. We'll be sending out information that can be useful either on sales or on information, new technology, things to be make you a better, safer driver with a radar detector. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.